Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. This will be the last one that has footage from the original Heart of Thorns PvE beta with my original Revenant, so say goodbye to him. I think we've pretty much seen all of it by now anyway. I apologise if there's been some overlap. It's kind of hard to keep track of this stuff, but this is the third little session we had the last 2 hours. That's what you guys will be seeing for today, and it's kind of in good time too, because this weekend, obviously, we have our next beta. It's not a PvE beta. In case you missed the news, we won't be able to go back to the Maguma Jungle, but we will get to play a Revenant anywhere we like. And the World vs. World new Borderlands beta is going to be going on as well. So there should be plenty of awesome footage for you guys to check out replacing this stuff. So a lot of good questions last week. I went with the earlier ones as I've been kind of negligent on that. Those of you who have been getting your questions in really early have been really missing out a lot lately. Plenty of discussion about the idea of DPS meters. One particular thing some people were mentioning that I think is really well put is Guild Wars 2 is mostly just interesting because it relies on preserving like balance and player behavior through ignorance. Like they make you ignorant of how much the Vinerath's boss is swinging and going up and down, so that you don't get angry at people when new people come in and they just gave it 10,000 more health. And it's like through ignorance they try and maintain the population, which is kind of weird, but also works-ish, I suppose. Alright, so for this week's questions, first one's from Peter Morgan, who simply says, "Hey WP, what's something new or interesting you've tried recently in your life?" Oh, well, thank you very much for asking. It may seem like my entire life is Guild Wars 2 at the moment, especially considering the channel has basically been purely Guild Wars 2. But there is other stuff going on, specifically with games. I've got a serious itch to play other games at the moment. Some people went back watching the Gone Home series I did with Matt, like last year. And it's really cool seeing comments on like alternate stuff like that. If you've been watching Visual Wood Live, the next episode is going to be tomorrow, by the way. You'll already know this, that I've been playing a lot of Divinity Original Sin. That game is freaking fantastic and probably one of the biggest reasons I'm all sad about leveling up in the game and how leveling gear and all that kind of stuff is just boring and unfun. Also, a lot of you really long time viewers will know I'm super into geocaching, and I was reading specifically about Planet of the Apes geocaches just the other day that are supposedly there were like 7 that were placed and only one of them like still survives at the moment, and it's somewhere in Brazil. Like that stuff sounds crazy exciting to me, and I've got a bit of an itch for that going on. And I am still completely and utterly absorbed into world building type stuff, not my own world building at the moment, but other projects people are doing. Is kind of inspiring and fascinating me. So that's kind of what's going on the side of GW2. So the next question is from Victor Snyder, who says, "Hey WP, I had a question. What do you think about the current damage balance issue caused by the latest patch?" This question's old, so this isn't the latest patch that fixed stuff like the grenade trait and the symbols with the Guardians, but the patch before that where they were completely out of control. They said they recently doubled the HP of some world bosses. I'm pretty sure nearly all of them, right? And they still die pretty fast. In fact, I know that one of the world bosses that's health wasn't doubled was the Eye of Zaitan in the Straits, and I guess they just forgot about it, which is a damn shame. Dungeons, they say, can be cleared in record time, even without an elite team for speed clearing. PvP is crazy. Doing 1 versus 2 is near impossible now, and most of the time you can kill downed enemies faster than stomping. What are your thoughts, and how do you think Arenanet will address this? Okay, so there's a lot of things you say here, and I actually disagree that there's been that much insane power creep, especially on the PvP side of things. So dungeons were mentioned, and yeah, absolutely at level 80, even now that the symbols thing is fixed, and even now that, I guess, I mean, the grenade thing in dungeons wasn't really a huge thing anyway, but even though that's now fixed, yeah, level 80 dungeons and high scale dungeons, they're going very, very, very fast right now, and it's kind of like I was talking about in my discussion video about, you know, making dungeons harder. I do think, even before the patch, enemies were dying slightly too quickly. They don't get the time to resolve many of their abilities. The absolute classic example for me is the Evolved Destroyer in Crucible of Eternity, where nearly every team I ever play in a dungeon now, we're good enough to just kill that guy in one burn, and then you obviously only have to deal with certain mechanics a minimal amount. But pretty much every boss in the game struggles from this. Pretty much any boss that you're burning down in the space of a single ice bow doesn't really get the time to express that it's kind of cool. So yeah, stuff is dying too quick, and that's definitely more of a problem now. I'd agree there. But low scale dungeons, as they did change the scaling, have felt a little bit better. They're still not as good as they were before Ferocity came into the game, but things are dying a little bit slower now. CM does feel a little bit tuned better. AC does feel tuned a little bit better as well. Yeah, we're still burning stuff super quickly, but I think it's disingenuous to say that the patch across the board completely buffed the speed times of absolutely everything, because those early scale dungeons, really, you can feel it's hit a bit more. Over to PvP, you know, when this patch came out, I did the incineration earlier that I talked about, and I demonstrated I showed a 19,000 tick of burning, and I kind of showed, you know, look, there's actually play here to doing this incineration style and building really, really high burning stacks. And there was a lot of discussion at the time as well about how condies were supposedly completely overpowered and ridiculous, and I saw that number in completely different discussions and threads about condition damage. I saw that number, that 20,000 number, getting thrown around a lot, and I must say, for PvP, I actually don't see condies being used much at all, and I don't see them being that overpowered either. We've already been doing a lot of discussion this week on the topic of Necromancer and how friggin' sad of a state it's in right now. And, you know, when we think of Necromancer as supposed to be a good Condi class, which by design it was supposed to be, and it falls so far short, no one really runs Condi Necros. The only Necros you see are Power Necros, and they're kind of lackluster compared to a lot of other power specs now too. Condis I do not see as out of control. And this doesn't just come from my perspective as playing like a very bunky spec that cleanses a lot of stuff. It comes from pretty much any spec I've been playing on. They're not as bad, I think, as people are making out. And especially this idea that you cannot 1v2 at all. Do you know how rare 1v2s were in the first place, even before this massive specialization patch came in? Like, when you were playing against equally skilled other people, 1v2s were incredibly rare. The most skillful, common play you would see is someone's engaged in a 1v2, holding someone's attention, forcing a +1 for a while, and then they manage to disengage through their stealth or through their blink, through their mobility, whatever, and they manage to get out. And that was the common thing you saw. People actually winning 1v2s was insanely rare. And to suggest that you can never survive 1v2 in the new meta, under the new circumstance, again, is pretty much baloney for me. I've been playing a spec that's so bunky at the moment that I haven't actually encountered a matchup or a build that will kill it 1v1, and I can stall a lot of 1v2s also. And if I can't, it's certainly not just because there's an insane amount of condies going on. This is not as bad as we once saw when people were running around with like their double, triple NG comps, and it was just pretty much impossible to survive the insane amount of condies coming at you. Last little topic as well, I guess world bosses. World bosses I've not played enough of. It does sound really lazy and sad to me that like they're just like, alright, we're just going to double the health. I mean, allowing world bosses to be critable, which this most recent patch has now done, and they are fully critable. Even that, doubling the health to address that, still makes them die quicker, because as soon as you can crit something, there's you have to appreciate, Assassin set, Berserker sets, there's a reason they're so good, because there's insane synergy between all three of those stats. If you are now allowing something to be crit, it's not just doubling the damage it takes, it's going over double the damage it takes in general. So doubling the health of the bosses seems like a really, really basic little thing, and I guess that's what it was. Hopefully they will treat them with a bit more respect and look more at the balance of world bosses, like across the board. And especially this is sad to me, because the best PvE content I have ever played in my entire time playing Guild Wars 2 is probably taking down Tequatl when Tequatl first came out, and taking down the Triple Trouble Worm when that first came out. True challenges on big scales that were an incredible amount of fun, and you know, these things are mere shadows of what they once were, and I hate to see that. I hate to see the integrity of those events be broken down over time, because Arenanet don't consider them when they change stuff. I mean, hell, the Worm Slayer Ascended stuff, they forgot existed and wasn't even like given the new Mystic Forge recipes to allow you to stat swap. That's the place that we're in with those, just so everyone's clear. So yeah, things are going to need to be tweaked, but I actually don't think it's as insane across the board as, you know, some of those comments, especially about condies early on, were just nuts, and they've really not turned out to be anything. Even the dev said, look, we know condies are kind of strong, and I think people just took that ball and rolled with it, and now we're settling in, and we're saying, okay, maybe it's not as bad as it once looked. Alright, anyway, so the next question is from Squarey, who says, hi WP, what do you think about Arenanet and the Hall of Monuments at the moment? It's been down for a long time, and they haven't announced anything. Do you think they've forgotten, or that they hope we will forget? Love to hear your thoughts. People are not going to forget. It would be crazy to expect us to forget, and even from Arenanet's side as well, it would be foolish for them to not take this seriously, because this is one of their biggest motivators for players going back to Guild Wars 1, and that is still revenue for them, and that is still retaining players that might otherwise completely leave the franchise when they grow bored of Guild Wars 2. A lot of GW1 players right now are GW2 players who are kind of a little bit bored of the game, waiting for new stuff, waiting for the Heart of Thorns, obviously, and they're like, alright, well maybe I'll go for those extra titles. So how broken this is just very depressing to me. I get it, they're trying to focus on the expansion, and adding Hall of Monuments back in isn't a priority for them, but can they just look into the issue a little bit, give us some kind of an update? because it's a huge part of the game to me, and especially as a player of the first game that has only just played more of the second game than the first, it's nuts to me to think all of that old stuff is kind of invalidated at the moment. People are running around with titles that they didn't earn, and people who are now legitimately earning it can't get their rewards either. It's sad, and it's a mess, and I hope they do something before HOT comes out. Round says, will you or Matt ever start a Visual Wood guild? I think the answer to this is almost definitely no. And for two reasons, different reasons. Number one, for me, I barely interact with the guild I'm currently in. You know, I'm in a few guilds, but I barely even interact with them. I don't really do guild missions at the moment. Like, I very much am a kind of a swingy person. I'll be, like, super involved in a community and then probably just, like, fade out, and then I'll come back again. Like, I go very all or nothing on the certain things I do. So I already don't feel like I need a guild that bad. I also, from the first game, had a lot of experience, like, trying to run a guild, officership in guilds, and I just think it's thankless. I think it's pointless. I get no satisfaction out of it whatsoever, and I really couldn't think of anything worse. So managing or running a guild of mine, or even delegating that to someone else to do it for me, but then nonetheless being accountable for what the Wooden Potatoes or Visual Wood Guild did, is just not anything I'm interested in. And then on Matt's side of things, I do know certainly that when GW2 first came out, he had a guild. Like, there was a Matt Visual Guild, but then that ended up falling apart too, and I'm not sure it's on his horizon either. So I doubt there'll be a guild for this. Sorry to disappoint people, but I think they're pretty fair reasons. Next question is from Stags9696. Says, why do you keep saying the final profession? Have they said that they'd never add a new one again? Ah, well, okay, that's true. They have never said that the Revenant is the last profession. Don't forget, guys, everything is on the table. But let's be honest with ourselves. There's really little reason for them to add any more professions. There's, first of all, the rule of threes. We've got 3 lights now. We've got 3 mediums. We've got 3 heavies. Now, that, to me, is kind of superficial anyway. I never minded when we only had 2 heavies. I wouldn't have minded if we had 4 lights, 3 mediums, and 1 heavy. Like, that doesn't really matter to me so much. But when it comes to how classes are designed, I think we are kind of at saturation point now. Remember, when they first, like, settled on their original 8 professions, now 9, they kind of did it because they were like, right, this specific number and these specific themes behind each profession kind of allow people to go into whatever, like, RP-ish angle they want now. And so in the future, with elite specializations, if someone comes to Guild Wars 2 and they're like, right, I love Maple Story, I play a pirate in Maple Story, I want to play a pirate in Guild Wars 2. What can I pick? Like, they should, with elite specializations, once a few of them are out, they'll be able to see, alright, there's the Corsair elite specialization. It's like, alright, this is my kind of piratey style. If someone really likes spear throwers, eventually, hopefully, they'll have their elite specialization for that. Like, Arenanet don't actually need to add new classes, because the pirate thing fits reasonably well into the existing medium classes. The spear thing, obviously, fits very well into, like, the warrior, the guardian, even the revenant, I suppose. Like, they can kind of slot them in their further elaborations. It's kind of like with engineer as well. There was a bit of discussion when they first revealed the engineer to us. They said, look, there's a couple of things we wanted, like niches for classes that thematically Guild Wars 2 wasn't hitting without the engineer. And it was like, first we wanted kind of like our machinist kind of guy. We wanted like our gun kind of character, our mechanical like themed character. And then they all were also saying, well, also another big bit in RPGs, another cool class trope that we didn't have was the idea of an alchemist and someone who does a lot of brewing and potion stuff. And they were like, well, okay, we could have 2 separate classes for that, or we could just put them together in the engineer. And that's what they did. That's why engineers have like the alchemy line. And so hopefully through elite specializations now they can kind of build on that alchemy idea, and then you'll have your true like potion maker class or something. But then my point is, it can all be done with elite specializations now, you know, when you want to hit those extra themes. And then the last point, probably the most valid one, is just how if every expansion they're adding new elite specializations, it means that the next profession they'd add after the Revenant isn't just having that profession's stuff, which has to be balanced perfectly and has to be done well. It then needs to have an elite specialization on top of that to match the Heart of Thorns ones, and then it needs to have another elite specialization on top of that to match whatever else has come out since then. And so it's suddenly more and more bloat they're putting on classes, and you can make the argument, well, they could just add a class that doesn't have the same number of elite specializations, but then that's less incentive to run that class, the variety that class has to offer, and so yeah, I think they have very little motivation to do it, and even if they do it, it would be a very difficult thing for them to do. Then it throws them off balance again, and then people can be like, well, they're going to have to add a 4th light armor and a 4th medium armor as well, and it's just, it goes on and on and on. So yeah, those are my arguments for why the Revenant is the final profession being added to Guild Wars 2. Nike asks, WP, do you think guild halls will have useful utility things in them besides decorations? One thing I've always wanted for ages was an indestructible golem, like in the Heart of the Mists, but in PvE, since builds in PvE can always be replicated near enough in PvP, so meaningfully to test things. I've suggested that they sell them on the gem store as a personal home instance upgrade, but having one be available as a guild hall function would make even more sense. Absolutely, and yeah, this worked as well before guild halls were a thing for the home instance too. Would have been wonderful. Right now, what do we have to resort to? Random test dummies that we find like at the start of Wayfarer Foothills that aren't properly scaled at level 80, that we couldn't QandA, that we couldn't crit. Like, this stuff just sucks. Makes me think back again to GW1, the Isle of the Nameless, and the Master of Damage, who you could just DPS forever, and it was kind of like an indestructible golem, but at the same time, the Master of Damage would be saying to you, you are doing this amount of damage as a team per second, you are doing this amount, and I think that would be perfect for the guild halls too. It goes beyond just having a utility thing for us to DPS here and check stuff, but because they'd be decorations, there's actually some really nice bonuses to that as well. Like, for example, you could create a ring of test dummies, all a very specific distance away from one another, to not just be able to test what your single target damage is on an indestructible golem, as we have to do in Heart of the Mist right now, but you can have like a whole ton of indestructible things to test your AoE capabilities. You can move them to test your bouncing projectile range and the kind of DPS you get out of that. You know, like thieves that would use unload with their bouncing pistol stuff comes to mind. You know, all these little things would actually be possible. I'd take it a step further. It would be nice to be able to set up little patrols on them, or actually make these dummies move, so then you can start testing your torment damage, or you can test your ability to CC. I think to an extent some of this will be solved with the guild arenas, because we'll just kind of be able to test on one another a little, but the indestructible thing, yeah, this would be a great decoration, and because it fits so perfectly with gem store monetization, I actually have quite high hopes for utility and just pretty decoration stuff in Guild Wars 2, because it just seems like the perfect kind of stuff they can keep throwing into the gem store and that people won't be too offended by. You know, these are exactly the kind of things as well, like especially the DPS thing that isn't just about PvE. It can be useful for PvPers as well, and it can be useful for World versus Worlders. I wonder whether we'll be able to swap our skill balance while in the guild hall. That'd be pretty crazy, right? So you could be in the guild hall under PvP balance or under PvE balance. So you could have your arena and choose, do you want your arena to be a PvE arena or a PvP arena? That would be super useful. Next question's from Cyhanic. Usually shy away from stuff like this, but says, how did you become so big on YouTube and within the Guild Wars 2 community? I'd say I'm not really big on YouTube in general, like at all. But within GW2, sure, I've carved my space. I would say, if you're asking this because you want to do YouTube yourself, there are only two things, like, in all honesty, and I don't think I hit either of these things perfectly all the time, which is why I'm not bigger than I could be, but I really think there are only two things you need to be really good at to do well at YouTube, and number one is consistency. If you did a video every single day, people get it into their routines, they will love you for it, and you can really build a good core audience. And the other thing is enthusiasm. I was watching a talk from Adam Savage just yesterday, where a quote was thrown out that I really, really believe in, and it's, if you're interested in something, that makes you interesting. And as far as my experience on this website, at least, I think that's very much true. Like, if you're very passionate, if you're very enthusiastic, if you really like something, I think that rubs off on people. And certainly when I watch other YouTubers, that's what I identify with most too. So as long as you're consistent and as long as you're enthusiastic, whether it's because you're angry about something or whether it's because you're really, really happy about something, obviously each is going to garner a different kind of audience. Those two things going hand in hand, you can do very, very well. And I think that's all I ever really did on YouTube. Some people will look at it as laziness, but I never really liked the whole pushing your videos out and asking people to like and asking people to sub and stuff. I just kind of figured, look, if people like it, then they'll do it on their own. I'd rather not pester them about it. And it's kind of put me places, so I'm quite happy about that. Next question is from Gorkum, who says, do you think we'll ever see Razza again, maybe even as a Revenant legend? There's an interesting theory about Razza. So for those of you who don't know about Razza, at the end of Nightfall, you met this demonic construct, and there is dispute as to whether he is a demon or not. But a demonic construct, this thing formed from the mist, which, by the way, I think is one of the definitions of demons in this universe, that was not like filled with hate or anything, it was kind of like a moral blank slate, And when the game first released, he was a ritualist hero who could play with you. But their original vision for it, and actually I think in the Guild Wars Nightfall manual that you could read with the game, it actually said that he was a hero who could have any primary profession he wanted. He could change his primary profession at will, which was something really rare and something really weird. Of course, when the game came out, they realized they didn't have the time to code this functionality in, and it took many years for them to finally add that to Razza. But now people are looking at him and they're seeing like his relationship with the Mists, they're seeing his adaptability and how he could change his profession, and they're saying, hey, this is super Revenant-ish. In fact, some of the art we see for Revenants have a lot of tattoos going on with them, and Razza was very tattooed as well. It's a cool theory. So then the idea as well that a Revenant legend could be Razza himself, exciting thought. He was certainly one of the most interesting heroes they added in Nightfall. But Nightfall was a game filled with colourful and wonderful characters, like 20 times the characters we've seen in Guild Wars 2 so far. So who knows? I mean, I wouldn't put Razza on my top 10 list for Revenant legends, I have to say. But he certainly is a fitting one, and I'd like some confirmation that he himself was kind of like an early Revenant of some kind. And the final question for today is from Pano Chai Mongol Mel, who says, hi WP, have you tried going near the Mystic Forge? You'll become a kind of spirit, which looks very similar to the Thormanova anomaly in the Thormanova reactor fractal. Do you think there is a relationship between Zomoros and that pure magic anomaly, or is it just a reused asset? This is absolutely not just a reused asset or accidental. They're trying to hint back to that. That was something that they set up back during the Living World that I do think has significance. That anomaly hopefully will be explained, maybe even in Heart of Thorns. And I think, you know, these are just dense areas with a lot of magic, a lot of crazy concentrated magic going on, the Mystic Forge included. And so this anomaly appears again. I don't know whether we're going to get explicit information between a connection of the anomaly and Zomoros anytime soon, but I think it is the dev saying to us, don't forget about the anomaly. There's something about the anomaly. And I mean, who knows where they're going with the story. They're going to set up there's some ultimate god and it's the anomaly. I doubt that too. But yeah, I think they're prodding at us and they're saying, hey, there's something that's going to be happening with this. All right, there you go, guys. That's the Q&A for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, I would love to hear them. I do read them all, and hopefully they'll make it onto the next episode. Cheers, guys, and I'll see you then when we'll have some different footage going on. Running around maybe in some dungeons. Maybe the new World vs. World Borderlands for the footage. We'll have to see. Cheers, guys.